Okay, today we're going to take a look at practice 20A in chapter 20 on the Inventor tutorials. And what we're going to be doing is creating an exploded presentation of this socket with a cable coming out of it. And then we'll also create an animation for practice 20B. So if you're following along in the book or via the tutorials on the class website, you'll still be opening and following this presentation along. I just won't keep it up on the side screen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up an assembly, but we want it to be a metric standard millimeter presentation assembly. So we're going to go Start, we're going to go New, we're going to go Presentation, and we're going to make sure that this presentation is in millimeters if we don't go that direction. This will open up our presentation interface. And what we're going to do today is we're going to create a view, but we will first, let's make it sure it's metric. Right there, application options. So we should have everything good, and we'll double check by going to the New tab and just make sure. So we're going to go standard millimeter here. I'll get rid of this one. Alright, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to click Create View. You'll get a dialog like this. It needs an assembly. And we're going to select Open, and we're going to pick our socket presentation from back in our C drive. Our class files, and we're going to go Socket Presentation. We're going to open that. And then what we want to select is Options, and we want to change the interference view to here. And we want to say OK. And we're going to select Automatic Explosion Method, because what this is going to do is it's going to explode everything based on the constraints that we built inside of the assembly. So we want these to be 25 millimeters. We want to show trails because that shows us where everything's coming from. And then we'll say OK. Now when you say OK, it'll load in. Let's close a few things out here. It'll load in your socket presentation, which you should have put together in a previous practice. You'll even notice the trails where it's pulling from. These trails can be highlighted and changed. But what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to manually move some of these parts to tweak the components and change the orientation a little bit. Because really this piece here should be in between the shell, right? This doesn't go outside of the object. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go into Tweak Components, and we're going to activate the Z direction. So we want to go, first thing when you go to Tweak Components is understanding, first it wants to know which direction are we moving the exploded components. So as I hover over red, the Z references up. If I hover over this, right, the Z is the other direction. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this guy up into the Z direction. And so I'm going to click this guy and I'm going to move him up this way. And then if I let go, it'll quit moving, or I can actually keep moving it depending on how I want it to look. Now, once I've picked this part, I can say Clear or Apply, and it'll let me move the next one around. So then if I want to move this guy down a little further, I can click on the vertical face and move that one down. In other words, another thing if you'd like to change, if you wanted to move in a different direction, let's undo and say we're back to where we were. We go back to Tweak Components. When you get the Tweak Component box, it wants to know what's the direction first. Let's say we pick that one. And then it wants to know which components move in that direction. And so we can pick this part. And notice it can move left or right. And the trail follows accordingly. But in this case, we'd rather not move that direction. So let's go ahead and fix that. Move it vertically. Say OK, clear. And then you'll save this as a presentation. Not to your C drive, you're going to save it to your documents for an exploded example. So you can go back to wherever you want to save it. Alright, now the next practice is where we're actually going to animate an existing assembly. And in order to do that, we're going to have to open up a new presentation file with the metric template again. So we're going to come back to New, go down to our standard presentation. We're going to open up the clutch bell assembly. So I'm going to go Create View. I'm going to open up the clutch bell assembly here. And then we're going to say Open. We want to do automatic and a distance of 25 millimeters. And we'll see what we get. And then we end up back here in the basic isometric home view. And what we want to do is let's turn on the perspective a little bit. So in the View tab, we're going to come over here, and instead of this being orthographic, we're going to change that to perspective. And what you'll see is things kind of vanish or become a little more realistic. So you can change that from perspective to orthographic depending on the type of look you want. So in the Presentation tab, we're going to click Precise View Rotation. And then we're going to set the increment to 10. We can set the degree of rotation to be one of these here if you want. And this will let you actually take a look at how the view can be rotated right as you click along here. Now this would come in handy later if you're trying to do a simple camera animation. But this is just a basic kind of view, and we'll rotate back around to sort of how our, and we can actually just take it back to here. And I'm going to right click in the, say OK, I'm going to right click here, and what I'm going to do out in this view, basically anywhere in a 3D view, if I want to set a camera like you would in real life, like you're going to snap a picture or create an animation, you can right click in the graphics window and you can say Save Camera. Now when you click Save Camera, how do I know where it's at? Well, if I go to the Drawing View dialog box, I can place it on the drawing as a view. I can also displace the camera view by clicking in the Drawing View dialog box. So in some cases you might be able to right click, go back to a current view, or change the initial location. And then we can also come back here, we can right click, and then we can go Restore Camera, and see it'll take you back to your home view. So if I move all around and I want to edit some components, move some things around, I can always right click and go Restore Camera, and it takes me back to my initial camera animation. So now in the Create panel, I'm going to go to Animate. And now when we talk about animation, we need to understand that we're talking about things moving a distance, or a change in location, or size, or properties, and then we're also talking about a change in time. That's an incredibly important point to understand the number or the amount of time, the amount of frames that you have, and then what you're actually doing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure our interval is set to 25, our repetitions are set to 1. We're going to accept the defaults in the parameters area. So we can play like this. We can click play, and notice it puts the assembly back together. We can hit reset, it busts everything back open, and then we could also change this interval to 5. Let's change our repetitions to 3. Apply and see what happens. See how much faster, and it slams it together. We could change that to 10, and then we could do 1, and then it's going to be really fast, right? We can then come back. The interval is the amount of time between each step. So if I do 20 seconds and 2 repetitions, it's going to put the assembly together twice over a span of 20 seconds. Twice. So you get a 40-second animation. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go back to reset. We're going to expand our little dialog box here, and you'll notice there's a sequence, an order of operations, and there's also a tweak distance, right? The distance in which these things are coming apart and coming back together. So we're going to set the interval to 50. We're going to set the repetitions to 1. And we're going to make sure we expand this. We're going to ungroup all these parts. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to go ungroup. We're going to select all these. So if I hold Control, all these should be ungrouped. There we go. That doesn't come up anymore. Now we're going to say Apply, because now these things are ungrouped. Then we're going to click Reset, and we're going to select the clutch gear and clutch bell and click Group. Clutch gear, clutch bell. I'm going to group these two together. And then what I'm going to do is apply and then see what happens. Now notice what happened there is we changed the rules of the animation. Before, everything was moving in its own little time. This time, the things that move together as a sub-assembly, the gear and the bell, move together. So we have our first clutch bearing, and then these two come together to kind of close the assembly. That can change your animation drastically. So now we're going to come back and we're going to ungroup. We go to reset, we ungroup our animation. We're going to select the clutch bearing, and notice we can change what things move first. So if I want to move the gear first, I can move the gear all the way up, apply that, press play, and notice the gear moves in place. Or if we want to make sure the bearing stays first, because the bearing may come into play, we will move the bearing to the top, and then we'll group the clutch bearing and clutch bell parts. And then this is just applying, we're moving them, notice those two come together, and then this piece comes together. So now we'll close this box. Now, in the model browser, over here, we're going to look for, let's see if we, so in the model browser, we're going to click over this little filter. This filter has different views. We can actually look at this as an assembly, like how we've built it from a series of parts. We can look at it as a sequence, where we have the explosion, the sequences associated. So notice when I hover over these, they're still grouped, the bearing and the clutch bell, and then the gear is by itself, and then of course we still have our parts. So now our model browser has become partially an animation editor. So we're going to expand the task folder, we're going to right click on sequence 1, and we're going to select edit. And what we're going to do to task 1 is we're going to change the interval to 10 and click apply. So we want our interval hit a 10. We're going to hit apply. And then we can hit play next to the sequences field to run the sequences. So we can hit play here, and you can see that subsequence move, right? And then if we want to take a look at sequence 2, we can go edit, and then we can hit play, and then see the whole assembly come together, because sequence 2 doesn't start until sequence 1 starts. So now what we want to do is we can say OK to what we changed. We're going to go to the Create panel, click Animate, and notice how when we click Animate, the speed changes. This moves faster, that one moves separate speed. So what we just did is we changed the speed of the different components coming in. because sometimes you may have a bolt that comes in, and you can show that inserting fast. But if you have something more complex like a gear or a sub-assembly, smaller parts all coming together, you're going to want to break that sequence down and simplify it out. And so we'll close this out, do not save, and you'll save and finish this practice 20.